берут свое начало задолго до нашего рождения, рождения наших мам и пап, дедушек и бабушек.
We see a very typical representation of a Russian schoolchild. She's white, she is ethnically Russian, she's dressed in a perfect little dress and perfect little pigtails.
Вот вообще пока не понимаю.
She is the Putin government's representation of a sort of average Russian little girl.
Разделяй и властвуй.
Да, это именно то, что используют западные государства.
So what we see in the video are a number of myths and outright lies and conspiracy theories that explain that the war is really about Western powers using Ukraine as a puppet regime to get at Russia.
March 3rd, 2022, 1 week after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 13-year-old TV presenter and singer Sofia Khamenko is giving a lesson called Defenders of Peace. Broadcast online by Russia's education ministry, it's an introduction to the Kremlin's official narrative on the war, aimed at Sofia's peers, school children.
Спецоперация – это как понимать?
Это когда цели ведут к миру.
Since the start of the war, Russia's youth have been a key target of the state's messaging. Last September, when students returned for the start of the school year, they found their history textbooks had been rewritten, and a new class had been added to the syllabus. Mandatory patriotism lessons called Important Conversations.
Every Monday, first lesson in Russian schools is dedicated to conversations about patriotism.
Начались сборы военных на операцию, на СВО. Я принял для себя решение, пойду, то есть буду помогать.
Millions of children in Russia, unfortunately, are forced to listen to false arguments about politics, about patriotism, about war, about how important it is that Russian soldiers are in Ukraine and how Vladimir Putin is the only solution to all the problems in Russia.
The new school history textbook is aimed at students who are about to leave school and students who might go on potentially to join the army. So history for them is a really vital part of educating them as future soldiers and as future regime supporters. What we see in the textbook is Russians as victims surrounded by enemies, desperate to undermine Russia. And children are taught that they should be suspicious of so-called foreign agents, that they should be suspicious of any non-official media, because everything outside of the state, everything outside of Russia is full of lies and mistruths.
Education is one of the most important vectors to try to spread the information, and Russian government understand that this is a prolonged conflict and they are trying to spread their message to the younger people to cement this message across the country. The school children are encouraged to only trust the official sources, so it is quite an important push in trying to encourage certain one-sided consumption of news, but also it encourages people to just tune out of the news.
A more nationalist vision of schooling that sees education as a carrier of patriotic values has been years in the making in Russia. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Moscow's oversight over education was tested. There was a lack of funding, a lack of vision. Some schools tried to westernize their curriculums, others embraced a more regional approach and began teaching in local languages. Everything changed when Vladimir Putin took office in 1999. Control over public education was gradually centralized. A new federal curriculum was introduced.
Сохранять и приумножать воинскую славу защитников Родины.
And extracurricular nationalist groups were created with the aim of fostering a state-centered national identity.
Putin's government recognized from the very beginning the importance of co-opting the youth, so to speak. During the 2000s, there were the popular youth movements, Nashi, Молодая гвардия, those who proclaimed the support for Putin. And then during the 2010s, they were trying to lure younger people into government jobs and trying to present this option of, if you're not outspoken against the state, you're fine, you can have your beautiful life.
We asked Russia's education ministry for an interview. They never got back to us. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Russian society has been transformed fundamentally. Virtually all independent journalism inside the country has disappeared. Dissidents have been exiled, anti-war protests outlawed, which leaves Russia's youth with nobody to look up to, but voices endorsed by the Kremlin.
Это война. Это война за наше существование, и не только за наше существование.
They are being told to conform, starting in the classroom.
Who is and who should be their heroes are, of course, the representatives of the system, are, of course, the representatives of the state, the government.
Добрый вечер, я Тина Канделаки, а это шоу «Умнее всех».
For example, there is Tina Kandelaki. She is a diva-style anchor on a TV program for the kids. She is talented, she is bright, and she is absolutely pro-Kremlin.
Друзья, сегодня хочу рассказать, в школах пройдут уроки разговора о важном по теме «Знания о героях».
Media literacy means understanding that the state's media and the state's reality is the only media and the only reality that can be trusted. That children are told that figures like Alexei Navalny, Katerina, other opposition leaders, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, for example, are working with the CIA, with America, seeking to undermine Russia. And what children learn, therefore, is that their job is to repeat what they hear.
Instilling young people with a sense of loyalty and dedication to the state is not just an ideological exercise. Russia is a country reliant on new conscripts. An undisclosed number of young soldiers have been killed in Ukraine. The Kremlin wants to increase its combat personnel by 30%. A more malleable, militarized generation of Russians will help with that. Across the country, the state has introduced war museums and memorials in schools. There are currently 22,000 of them in operation. It's part of a Putin directive to open museums in every region of Russia. They are places of commemoration, but of a distorted history, where young Russians are told that true patriotism comes with self-sacrifice.
One of the more disturbing trends that we might see in Russian schools is plaques being erected to graduates of high schools who have died in the so-called special military operation, hailed as models of the best kind of Russian you can possibly be. So what we see with the museums that are being erected is that these are places of pilgrimage where Russians pay tribute to the sacrifices of the past and the sacrifices of the present, and in particular, the supposed utopia that's going to come from a future victory in the war against Ukraine and against the West.
These museums are having just one main goal. They're trying to teach children that this war in Ukraine right now is something similar to the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. The problem is that in the Great Patriotic War, Soviet Union was saving the world from fascism. And right now, Russia is on the opposite side. That's why they're having such a big campaign, because it's really hard to explain what the hell is going on and why Russia is killing Ukrainians and why Russian soldiers are dying.